Good evening, comrades, and welcome to Online Communist Forum. Um, just as a reminder before we start, there will be a Palestine solidarity demonstration in Liverpool to march to the Labour Party conference. We'll be meeting near Liverpool Street, Lime Station, for anybody's interested. Without further ado, over to Jack Conrad for a report from the Provisional Central Committee of the Communist Party of Great Britain. Thank you.
Well done, Ian. I've sort of been advertised for speaking on World War III, and also in the paper, in the Weekly Worker, on the not Biden, excuse me, on the Harris-Trump debate. Fortunately, I'm going to be speaking about both, so no cock up there. But I'm going to begin with the Harris-Trump debate. You have to say that from the Democrats' point of view, it couldn't have gone anything worse than the Trump-Biden debate, which was just a disaster. I mean, quite frankly, Trump didn't need to do anything. I felt, on a human level, I felt sorry for Biden. Clearly, his faculties, are going fast. Yeah, it was sad just seeing a human being put up there, trained, like some sort of performing animal, and still not being able to hack it. Well, this time it was different. I did take the trouble. It was an experience. I have watched things like that before, but frankly, I was deeply unimpressed by both of them, which is sort of surprising, given that Trump, okay, he's getting on a bit, but he's what you would call him, semi-professional TV performer, certainly very, very experienced TV performer. And of course, Harris is a trained lawyer as well as a politician who apparently was preparing for this debate for an entire week with advisors and I don't know, coaches and all the rest of it. So the thing began with the question from the moderators. Let me quote it. Are you better off than 4 years ago? This was a question directed at Harris. And I was amazed because she didn't answer the question. Now, it's true, I suppose, in politics that, come from your strong point, don't emphasize your weak point, but she didn't answer it. And I don't know what the agreement was, but certainly if I was a moderator under those circumstances, I might be tempted to, when she'd finished, to say the question was on, are you better off, 4 years ago? And you didn't answer that. But hey, and then what was interesting to me is not only did the moderator not ask that question, which maybe that was the agreement, that they weren't allowed to intervene in that way because it would come over as partisan, but then Trump didn't seize on that point and, go for the jugular. Instead, what they were both doing is, how should we put it, playing to a script that they'd been given and, almost sort of banged into their heads. So Trump's response to it was to talk about migrants. And I think the moderator came in at some point and said, we will be talking about that. But that was his script. It was migrants, 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 including, yes, the wonderful passage. Was it Spring Somewhere, rather? Anyway, I'll call it, Smallsville, in honor of Superman. But apparently in Smallsville, the migrants had come in and started eating the cats and the dogs and all the rest of it. It was an appalling debate. What was Harris doing meanwhile? She was going on about her values. So the fact that she's changed her political position on almost everything, since she last had a bid for presidency, that time, of course, against Joe Biden. No, what she wanted to emphasize is that she was from an ordinary middle class background, and how mum did this and mum did that, or whatever the hell it was. So yeah, as a piece of TV, as a piece of entertainment, as a piece of, how should I put it, political information, I found it extraordinarily vacuous. So not only did we have Harris apparently, approving of migrants who eat cats and dogs, apparently she's a Marxist. Well, I sort of wish she was. Apparently, it's her father, but presumably, like father, like daughter. That seemed to be the implication. Either way, what hit me is, unlike Trump versus Hillary Clinton or Trump versus Biden, he didn't really have any killer points. As I said, he was sort of pre-programmed on the migrant question, and that was the only thing really he could say. And Harris, didn't rise to the debate. She'd obviously practiced her various looks of astoundedness, like how extreme or stuff like that. And she was trained to, as I should be doing, look straight in the camera. She was doing an awful lot of that. So she'd clearly been coached on that. But it was, as I say, overall, is it 1.5 hours or something like that? Whatever time it took, it was pretty poor. It wasn't really a debate. It was a pre-programmed performance. And maybe in terms of core voters, the message was that Donald Trump is an extremist. How dare you talk about migrants being criminal? Look at you, sort of type message. And on the other side, it was Kamala Harris is pro-migrant and a Marxist or something along those lines. Now, of course, as we all know, anyone who knows anything about American politics, and you don't have to know very much, we all know that it's going to be decided in six states. Why? Because we're dealing with an electoral college, and the electoral college is elected via states. So we're not dealing with a popular vote. It's not been unknown. In fact, it's a known that many a president, not least in recent years, has been elected on a minority vote. So, for example, one Donald J. Trump minority vote. What are the states? Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. Now, of course, what matters is how it went down there. And according to the pollsters, you've got, roughly speaking, in those states, it's been about 50-50 or 49-51. It's that sort of type stuff. So Trump will be ahead in one or two of them. Harris will be clearly ahead in another one or two of them. And the other one will be dead tied. It's that sort of type stuff. Well, given the aftermath of this debate, I don't know what the audience was, other than I would expect it to have been large. What we have is evidence of Harris pulling ahead in these states. Now, as I said, they matter. One would expect, given the sort of distribution of populations in states, for the Democrat candidate to get more votes than the Republican, but the Republican could collect the swing states. Well, it looks like, at least as we're here at the moment, that Harris has edged ahead. So that's worth noting. Now, of course, we don't know until we know. We won't know until November who actually wins. But you'll be very foolish, I think, to actually dismiss polls. And indeed, that both the Republican side and the Democrat side will be piling in enormous resources and analyzing those results, which a particular group to target with which particular message. Is it men? Is it women? For example, Harris clearly hit home when it came to women with Trump's stance on abortion, basically leave it to states, and his claim, which was squashed by one of the moderators, that in this or that state, Democrat governors are allowing abortion to post-born babies. Well, as they pointed out, that's illegal. It's called murder. That's not abortion. Either way, you'd certainly expect on the basis of that debate for Harris certainly to gain traction amongst female voters. How the migrant message goes down in each of these states, I don't know. I suspect it would vary from state to state, given the number of migrants and all sorts of other factors. Either way, I do think it's just worthwhile commenting on the nature of American democracy. Now, certainly in the 18th century, right into the 19th century, it's worth recalling that in terms of European bourgeois and aristocratic circles, the word Democrat was an insult. It was equivalent of saying anarchist today, or mob, or Marxist, I suppose, in America, or used to be in America at least. The word socialist. This was an insult word, and it was only actually, of course, with the progress of Marxist parties, not accidentally called social democrats, i.e., championing the right of everyone, men and women, to vote, i.e., universal suffrage, did the bourgeoisie start to change their discourse. And so you had an Americanization in that sense of the word being adopted by the establishment. And of course, what happened with the Russian Revolution, certainly when the Russian Revolution starts to retreat and Soviet elections become, how should we put it, increasingly bogus, and you have, Trotsky writing surely his worst book, Terrorism and Communism, of where, he's mocking the idea of democracy and is putting the dictatorship of the proletariat above democracy. Basically, we handed the bourgeoisie a gift. And certainly after the Russian Revolution, or soon after the Russian Revolution, the bourgeoisie started to dress itself in the garb of democracy. Now, we've always, and I say we, I'm talking about the CPGB Provisional Central Committee, we've always questioned the democratic credentials of the bourgeoisie. I don't think it's a democratic class. All you need to do to find out how democratic the bourgeoisie is go to work. When was the last time the boss turned around and said, well, let's have an election, let's have a debate about what we do next? No, in the workplace, the bourgeoisie act as dictators. And when it comes to so-called democracy, what we have is the least democracy that they can get away with. So there's all sorts of checks and balances against democracy in bourgeois constitutions. So, for example, in Britain, we have the monarchy, which isn't just some feudal relic, some figurehead. It is one of the checks against democracy that could be brought into play under extraordinary circumstances. The same applies, of course, with the House of Lords, whether that includes hereditary lords or simply appointed lords. That's what it's there for. And if that stuff fails, then you've got the army, then you've got the secret state. And it's the same in the United States, that what you have is a presidency, a sort of elected monarch, but also what you have in the United States is state rights, but also a Supreme Court. So there's all sorts of checks and balances to stop any democratic breakthrough from below. That's what it's about. So state rights, for example, you just look at the size of states, you look at the population of states. It's very convenient for the Republicans. It's very convenient for the right that an awful lot of small states tend to vote right, where the big states like New York and California tend to vote more left. Either way, from our angle, the democratic revolution in the United States is yet to happen. And that's true in Britain. It's true in every capitalist country. We don't have the rule of the majority. We have the rule of a minority that sometimes gets the consent of the majority. Usually, though, what you get is low turnouts. What you get is a switching off from politics. Either way, we don't dismiss that space. We don't take the view of the anarchists of what is the point of voting? It don't change anything. Or to use a phrase, if voting changed anything, they would abolish it. Well, indeed, that's true. But we can use the vote in order to organize a party, in order to organize an opposition, in order to legitimize our revolution in the eyes of the masses. And it's just worthwhile pointing out, I think, that if you look at the Bolshevik Party in terms of the October Revolution, so the story goes, and I'm prepared to believe it unless someone tells me it's just a story, that Trotsky persuaded Lenin, and Lenin, I don't know, presumably persuaded the Central Committee to go for the uprising in the midst of the Congress of Soviets, both the workers and soldiers Soviets, but also the peasant Soviets, because they thought that they would secure a majority. They knew that they would secure a majority in the workers and soldiers Soviets. That was a foregone conclusion. They knew that. But what they wanted is a display of their majority in the peasant Soviets, which of course relied on the split in the Socialist Revolutionary Party. So you had the formation of the left Socialist Revolutionary Party and the right Socialist Revolutionary Party. And it was left Socialist Revolutionary votes plus a few Bolshevik votes that gave them their majority. So when it comes, for example, to Westminster, we're definitely in favor of standing in elections. And that also applies to the United States. I think, I'm not sure of the date, but I think it was shortly before Engels's death, some comrades in the United States wrote to Engels and says, should we stand in the presidential elections? And I think his answer was revealing, and that was, yes, you should, but you should stand on the basis that if you win, you're committed to abolishing the post of president. And I think it was in that letter that Engels also made his view known about how perhaps the state system in the United States was antiquated. It was time to sweep the state system away. And I think he also said in passing that federalism in Britain, in Great Britain, and he was clearly thinking of Britain and Ireland, that would be a step forward. But in the United States, it surely had its time. Well, if that was true over 100 years ago, it's most certainly doubly true today in 2024. So what to do in November? I don't know. I sort of find myself in a position where I understand the advice, however you interpret it, of Pope Francis, of where he says, vote for the lesser evil. I presume that's a sort of hint and a nod to Catholic voters in the United States to vote Harris. On the other hand, I'm not sure, simply because of the question I've already mentioned, abortion. I don't know. Either way, the question is there for the left, and that is the necessity to break the working class and the left to begin with from choosing the lesser of two evils. So I understand that approach. I understand the dilemma that comrades are faced with in the United States. Nevertheless, at some point, that break has to happen. And all I can say is, however difficult that break is, the sooner that break happens, the better. Okay, moving on to the other advertised subject of this political report. We've just had David Lammy and Keir Starmer back from Washington. They've been meeting Biden and other officials from the administration in the White House. And I'm not sure, I was looking up just before this meeting started, has there been a clear result of this meeting? I still haven't found it. So I'm just doing it on the basis of hunch. We were told that they'd agreed, quote unquote, a strong position. This is clearly in reference to Storm Shadows. This is the British version of Scalp, the Anglo-French tactical ballistic missile. This is obviously in reference, as we know, to Ukraine and Zelensky's agitation about being allowed to use this weapon, not against Russian occupied territory in Ukraine, i.e. Crimea, Donbass and the south, but against Russia itself. And thus far, America has said no. Not only no to its own technology being directly used against Russia, but also its allies' technology in terms of missiles being used in that way. Now, my guess is, in terms of that, what such an attack would rely on is, first of all, Western intelligence, and really what I mean by that is American intelligence, i.e. spy satellites, but also, I would guess, American know-how when it comes not only to targeting, but programming the missile, where exactly it's going to strike, because we're not talking about some equivalent of V1s or V2s from World War II. We're talking about pretty accurate, you could use the term pinpoint accuracy when it comes to such missiles. So the purpose of these missiles isn't simply to inflict terror on the enemy population. There they are in St. Petersburg or Moscow. It's actually to take out command posts. It's actually to hit logistical hubs. It's to take out, militarily important targets. And of course, everyone knows that in order to do that, you've had to have the direct cooperation with US military and perhaps British personnel. I would guess that would be the case with Storm Shadow, but that's just me. I don't know enough to say that definitively. Either way, of course, this debate happens in the context of Vladimir Putin saying, if you agree to this move, then it amounts to a declaration of war by NATO against Russia. You could certainly make the argument that it would make them a belligerent. Does that mean that we stand immediately on the threshold of nuclear war in Europe or a generalized nuclear exchange between Russia and Europe and Russia and the United States? I don't think so, but I'd certainly make the argument that the nature of this conflict from a pretty early stage, certainly after stage one, is it's had all the signs of being something equivalent broadly, just broadly, not exact, but broadly equivalent of, the Western Front in World War One. Effectively static lines with slow grinding advance here or there. True, we have seen some dramatic Ukrainian advances. Initially, we saw dramatic Russian advances. True, we've seen the incursion into the Kursk oblast, but nothing decisive. There's been no decisive movement. And indeed, all the signs are that this year there'll be no breakthrough by Russia, no collapse of the Ukrainian army, and vice versa. So, the Kursk incursion isn't going to lead to the collapse of the Russian army. It looks like things will grind on for some considerable time. And precisely under those circumstances, there is on both sides an incentive to up the ante, both in terms of rhetoric, which is clearly what Putin has been doing. He did it over, I think, F-16 fighter bombers, mainly delivered from Western Europe. But he also did it, if my memory serves me right, with the delivery of main battle tanks, such as the Challenger 2. Britain moved first, all 12 of them. I don't know how many still are in service. Crucially, Germany with the Leopard 2, and America followed up with, again, a handful or so of its Abraham tanks. Either way, my suspicion, for what it's worth, is that what strong position means is that Britain has been given the go-ahead to give Ukraine the go-ahead. Now, they're not going to say it openly. What they're going to do is when a Storm Shadow missile lands somewhere in Russia, then they might admit it, that they've given permission, because you can't disguise it, because they will be made in Britain. Here's the parts, here's the serial number, and all the rest of it. So they don't seem to be announcing it, but that seems to be what the go-ahead is. Now, my understanding is that, for what it's worth, is that Russia has already moved its important command posts inside Russia beyond the range of Storm Shadows. Storm Shadows, just to emphasize the point, are delivered from air. But of course, the reality for both sides, actually, when it comes to aircraft, is that they have to do it now. They have to launch their missile. They have to launch even glide bombs from well in their own safety zone. We're not talking about Ukrainian F-16s, for example, traveling all the way into Russian airspace. They would get shot down pretty damn quickly. The purpose of F-16s, as far as I can see, is a morale boost on the one side, and maybe they will have a certain effectiveness when it comes to shooting down slow moving, because that's what they are, drone attacks on Kiev and other such cities. but no, not when it comes to flying deep into Russian territory. In other words, Russia recognizes that when it comes to air superiority, no side really has it. The era of air superiority, at least in terms of this sort of war, has gone. What we've got is drone warfare. What we've got is missile warfare. Either way, it's 155-mile range, this missile. Now, the United States has got other missiles, of course, which it's either supplied, which have got a slightly longer range, and it's got other missiles which it could easily supply, which have got, how should I put it, an extra 100-mile range. Either way, Russia has been forced to pull back, its aircraft, pull back its command posts, strengthen or pull back its storage facilities. Now that matters when it comes to supplying the troops on the ground. So if you can hit, for example, a railhead, that is going to disrupt Russian supply. It's not going to stop it, but that would affect the war, but only, in my view, at least, in a marginal sense. So I don't see these missiles being a winner for Ukraine. I think they will make a marginal difference, but nothing decisive. But precisely what we get is this rhetoric, what was it, turning Kiev into a grey blob. I don't think that's going to happen. On the other hand, we have had at least, how should I put it, increased rhetoric from the NATO side, not only about storm shadows. I heard the other week the foreign minister of Poland talking about or speculating about the possibility of supporting or protecting Ukrainian nuclear facilities from potential Russian threat. Now, I don't buy into the idea that Russia is targeting Ukrainian nuclear facilities, but we do know that Ukraine has targeted Russian-held, and I do use the word purposely, Russian-held nuclear facilities. They have targeted that, and the International Atomic Energy Agency has, thrown up its hands and said, "Are you crazy?" And to me, this is just another argument in terms of my angle on the inadvisability of so-called peaceful nuclear power. In my view, nuclear power is dangerous. It's linked in with the military. It has no other rational use to it. It's expensive, it's dangerous, it takes an awful long time to get up. We don't want more nuclear. We want to decommission nuclear. And that can take tens, hundreds of years. I was reading about Britain's nuclear facilities. There was a time period put off, I think it was 130 years before you could reuse this site that they've just decommissioned. Okay, of course, we also had the expulsion of 6 British diplomats. This is a warning shot, but as I said, at least in terms of my assessment, we know what route we're traveling on. We need to go back. We need to look at the bigger picture. This isn't a war simply between a big Russian bear and poor little Ukraine. That's how it's portrayed in the Western media, an unprovoked attack. We need to put it in the context of a declining US hegemon, a hegemon that doesn't face any sort of serious challenge from Russia, but it does face a serious challenge from China. And we need to understand what's going on in Ukraine precisely in that context. We need to understand what happened in 2014 with the Maidan coup. We need to understand all of NATO's expansion not simply against Russia, which of course it is directed against, but crucially, at the end of the day, this is about China. And in my view, we are not, I hope, heading for a generalized nuclear exchange. That would be disastrous for all of us, for all of humanity. But we are heading towards an escalation of war threats. And clearly, the aim of the United States is to bring about regime change in Moscow through its war in Ukraine not going well, leading to the toppling or the retiring of Putin. And they would be hoping for someone like a Yeltsin, someone like a Navalny to come in. And if that was done, that's a big ask. It's by no means something that you go, that's clearly going to happen, isn't it? You could have completely the opposite sort of replacement. You don't need to get someone like a Yeltsin or someone like a Navalny. You could get a super, excuse me, I want to have a cough, a super aggressive replacement. That's quite conceivable. But no, but what the United States is banking on is replacing the Putin FSB regime with a pliant regime, some sort of neo-colonial arrangement, and that would surround China. So China would be surrounded from the north, it would be surrounded from the south with India, it would be surrounded from the east with the American fleet. That's the American aim. Its aim is to strangle China, to reduce China to a supplicant, not to recruit it into the imperialist hierarchy, but precisely to do what it did to the former Soviet Union, which is reduce it to poverty and dependency. Clearly something that Putin was put in to reverse. There you are. That's that section. Let's just quickly look at the latest military situation. I take seriously talk of Rust in the Donbass being a strategically important town. I didn't take talk of Bakhmut being a strategically important town. Yes, it was symbolically important to both sides. Both sides were prepared to sacrifice thousands of troops in order to keep it or in order to take it. But once Russia had taken it, did it change the situation? Did it change the military situation in the Donbass in any dramatic way? I simply look at it and go, well, no. But that is not the case as I understand it. And I'm not just reading one source, I'm reading a whole series of different so-called experts, and I'm certainly no expert. But this would open up the possibility, I don't think this year, but perhaps next year, of Russia taking the whole of the Donbass. That's the fear on the Ukrainian side. That's the fear on the NATO stroke American side. Meanwhile, you've got Kursk. We're told that Russia has organized this or that offensive operation. I see no sign of some sort of disaster pending for Ukraine. I could be totally wrong on this one. At the moment, the Russian high command, Putin, and the regime seem quite content to contain Ukrainian forces in the Kursk oblast and squeeze them, but meanwhile continue their push to the west in Donbass, grind forward. Now that's going to be limited, and that's going to depend on, to a large extent, on the weather, when the weather changes. And I'm not sure in that part of Ukraine exactly when the weather changes, and I don't suppose it comes on any exact basis. Nonetheless, when it comes to spring, when it comes to autumn, what you have is the mud season. And when I mean mud, I mean mud. Mud that's so deep that if you run your tank too slowly, it gets stuck. Let alone soft-skinned trucks that are delivering food, ammunition, and all the other vital supplies for the front line. Agricultural track turns into a quagmire. So I'm reminded, actually, in terms of reporting of some of this stuff, the Sun, bizarrely, is one of the best papers to read. But I'm reminded of a Sun reporter who was out there looking at our glorious Challenger 2 tanks and how they were performing now in Ukrainian hands. And the Ukrainian crew, who just learned how to operate this piece of relatively extraordinarily expensive equipment, plowed it forward into the mud, and there it got stuck, and they had to get load of equipment to drag it out of the mud. That's an illustration of why you don't tend to have offensive operations in Ukraine in the spring or the autumn. And autumn is fast approaching here, but also in Ukraine. So my own estimate is that things look like grinding on, with people dying needlessly on both sides. What I would add is that, of course, we don't just have fierce fighting. We'll have an awful lot of quiet fronts. And what you get there, and any general will tell you, anybody who knows anything about military matters will tell you, under those circumstances, the grunts on the ground, and we're not only talking about privates and sergeants and corporals, even the captains know it perfectly well. It's better to live and let live under those circumstances. So when you're living in a situation, the rain is bucketing down, it's just horrible with the mud and the cold. When you're clearing out your trenches, you basically come to a sort of nod and a wink. Not that you can see the nod or the wink, but you come to an agreement with the other side. Look, if you don't shoot us, we won't shoot you. And I'm not looking to that as a way out of this hellhole, but I am looking at it on the basis of that would be something we would welcome as internationalists, as something that we would be urging troops to turn their guns against their generals and against their politicians, against their rulers. But what about the social imperialists? What about them? Would they urge fraternization? I doubt it. And indeed, if we look at Britain, I just want to finish just by talking not only about the winter fuel payment question, but precisely the question of guns or butter. Because, I don't know what the exact total is, but we're told that an awful lot of pensioners, is it 10 million, is it 11 million? But that will include an awful lot of pensioners that are eligible, but haven't applied, and perhaps, this is the estimate, won't apply. I think it's just under 1 million of them could be eligible for these winter fuel payments, but for one reason or another haven't applied for them, won't apply for them. But we're told that this is because Rachel Reeves finds herself in a terrible situation because of the Tory government. We have all this talk about a 22 billion black hole. Partially, of course, that's in order to pay these greedy junior doctors who actually, don't want to live hand to mouth. What a disgrace. It's in order to pay rail workers. It's there to pay all government workers. So the black hole is partially the sort of Tories holding back on coming to some wage deal, which they would have come to in one form or another. So partially, this is, how should you put it, a bit of window dressing for austerity, an excuse for austerity, but there's a reality to it. Britain certainly isn't awash with money. So there's cost cutting going on, and we've heard Keir Starmer, no more money for the NHS unless there's reform. Well, he's promising some sort of reform. Either way, the message seems to be gloom, gloom, gloom. Don't ask because you ain't going to be given. And even if you fight, we ain't going to give. So don't fight. That seems to be the message that they're coming forward with this October with the budget. But when it comes to Ukraine, I notice that not only did the Tory government give huge amounts, we're not talking about, wartime amounts, but nonetheless huge amounts, but so is the Labour government. And we haven't heard any statements from the Defence Secretary or the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister that they're going to go down a German route and cut aid to Ukraine. So we have on the one side this 22 billion black hole, but we also have a situation where Britain has supplied and will continue to supply billions of aid to Ukraine. I think the figure thus far, this is under the Tories and now under Labour, thus far is something in the region of 10 billion pounds. So that's something like half this so-called black hole. So when it comes to fighting wars, okay, a proxy war, there's the money there. The money will still keep coming from the United States, presuming that Harris wins and not Trump in November. It will certainly keep coming from Britain. Meanwhile, if you look at the social imperialist press, anti-capitalist resistance, if you look at the AWL, what they run is with their press, no to cuts, give us a pay rise, no to the withdrawal of winter fuel payments from pensioners. So I'm reminded of that famous phrase, guns or butter. And he definitely didn't coin the phrase, but the phrase is famously associated with Hermann Göring in the Nazi regime in the 1930s. And he actually put forward the choice to the German people. And he said, you can either have guns or butter. Now in the 60s, if I remember right, maybe it was, I think it was the 60s, Lyndon Johnson's administration said you could have both. But the reality is you have one or the other. Anyway, back to my story of Hermann Göring. He said you can either have guns, that makes you powerful, or you can have butter, and that makes you fat. If you have to see a picture of Hermann Göring, you have to say that he was used to eating an awful lot of butter. But the point is there. We're not talking, I don't want to go into, Keynesian stimulus and how well the American arms industry is doing, because it's doing very well, thank you very much. Because as well as supplying Ukraine, they're yanking up the pressure on other NATO powers and other countries in the world to spend on American arms. But for the imperialist left, for the social imperialist left, we ought to ask them, demand that they take ownership of spending on guns instead of butter. Because, of course, what butter stands for isn't some indulgence, it's basic needs of the population. That's actually the choice that Hermann Göring was posing. You can have guns or you can have better living standards, and we're going to choose guns. And that is what the Starmer government is doing. And that's what the Biden administration has been doing in the United States. And I'm going to finish on that one. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Jack. If anyone would like to speak or ask a question, please click the raise hand button. You will all now be made into panelists. It doesn't mean to say you have to speak or that you have to switch your camera on, but by making you all panelists, it gives us an opportunity to see who's in the audience and allows everybody to contribute more fully. So to start the ball rolling then, I mean, if one considers that the Stop the War Coalition is precisely a kind of hodgepodge of people who are, you know, pacifist or the lowest common denominator, really, in terms of opposition to war. What you've been suggesting would suggest that it's high time that there was specifically a communist anti-war movement that would particularly draw the connections out between the struggle in Palestine as well as the struggle in Ukraine, and of course how they're both intimately related to the US imperialist hegemon. And surely there's a possibility of some kind of communist unity around an anti-war movement that would have specifically that class conscious element at its heart. Any other questions? Tina.
Hi. Hold on a second. I think the live stream is still going. Hold on.